Hello and welcome back to another Hallowoods weekly behind-the-scenes Q&A live stream backstage extravaganza. Thank you for tuning in, not only to the show itself, as you do week to week, but also to behind-the-scenes features and accessories like this. This is our last Q&A live stream of the season, after which we will be on sort of a holiday/moving break for the Hallowoods. And this next episode coming up will be our last episode before that break. After that, the Hallowoods will be sort of hibernating and moving things in the background for about probably 6-ish weeks, leading up into, I believe, the first Wednesday of February. We are back. And we will continue on from there over the rest of 2025 with the back like 3/4 of season 5. At this point, we will be 8 episodes into this season, and then we will be sort of returning for the back 22 episodes in the spring. So I hope you've enjoyed the journey so far with season 5. It is a season I've enjoyed doing quite a bit, both in doing things that are new and returning to a lot of Hallowoods nostalgia. And so it's been a fun one to work on. I also hope the holiday break goes well for you and me both. If you have not attended one of these Q&As before and you are in the present, you can click over to the YouTube chat side of things. And once you're in there, you can submit questions. I will answer those towards the back half of the stream. If you are watching in the distant future and happen to be a patron of the show, this live stream is come and gone, but you could submit questions for future live streams in a patrons only ask box that they have in Patreon, where they submit questions week to week that they want answered. So I will go through our own sort of behind the scenes updates for the show, and then we will get to the patrons ask box of questions, and then finally we will get to any questions in chat. So feel free to drop those throughout so that they're there when we get to that point. That said, the most the most exciting news of the week for the Hallowoods is not very exciting. In fact, it is categorically bad news. The Canadian government is sort of squashing the postal strike. And so 55,000 Canada Post postal workers are being commanded by the Canadian government to return to work and stop striking. Which some have expressed as sort of an attack on their ability to strike and express themselves and their freedom of work, which is not a good thing. It is could be useful on account of the roughly 70 folks that are waiting on ink sketch commissions that have not been able to ship during the absence of Canada's mail system for the last month. So bad news for rights and freedoms of Canadian postal workers. Good news, people that are waiting on ink sketches probably will at least have them out shipping into the world within the next maybe 2 weeks, depending on when specifically offices open back up. And pending any other drama, there's a possibility that the Canadian mail system could secede from the Canadian government and become its own postal country conglomerate, which I think would be a great country to live in. But that said, short of that happening, ink sketch commission people, you probably will not have to wait much longer for those to ship. But I do apologize because we have never had a month-long delay like that. But also, we have never had the Canadian postal system shut down for a month before. So that is fascinating times to live in, even if the postage time is a bit longer for our sketches. That is also good news for several patrons who are waiting on merch bundles. But that said, that is this week in Canadian mail politics and their trickle-down effects on podcast merch. Speaking of podcast merch, thank you to folks who have ordered some of our new shirts and stuff through DFTBA, the merch company that is now partnering with us to produce and ship Hallowoods merch. which is awesome. I was surprised to find a couple shirts have been ordered, which is great. I certainly will be continuing to sort of stock new designs, hopefully fairly frequently. And so, where that is concerned, feel free to toss suggestions, especially the Tumblr Ask Box is also a great place for that. And I will be aiming to deliver at least one of those suggestions roughly each month in 2025. A little bit of prep time in January pending, but certainly February onwards. Getting new merch designs fairly frequently will be a bit of a priority. That way we can sort of start to get more designs out there now that we have a good high quality partner to make that stuff, and handle the shipping side for more exclusive things that I want to make but would be sort of prohibitively difficult to otherwise. I'm all ears on that front. I have had some wonderful suggestions so far, so I feel like we've at least someone that has submitted sort of merch design requests probably will be happy. But the other thing coming in the spring will probably be some fancier stuff. Because there are things that are very easy to make when it comes to shirts, hoodies, mugs, that type of thing. All I really need to do is create the art, and then it's good to go. When it comes to embroidered patches and pins and things, there's sort of samples and a big batch order and money that needs to be put up front into that to make them. And so that is a little bit more intensive. But hopefully over the spring, I'll be able to start kind of putting in some elbow grease to make some stuff that we've been hoping to make for a while. Pins would be one of the bigger ones, especially for things like the Stone Mated Band logo, but also the Walter Pensive's groundskeeping logo, probably some Clementine season 4 stuff. And then on the flip side, embroidered patches would be great, again, for Walter Pensive's groundskeeping, but also Scout City. Achievement badges would just be excellent. But again, logistics on that front. That said, that is kind of the big things that we're taking along for the show at the moment. The holiday break is going to allow for kind of working ahead on the next season, assembling some very fun stuff, but also just the sort of logistical troubles of moving locales and just packing up my little office studio here and putting it somewhere else. And so hopefully that is also a smooth process, and it would be nice if it goes relatively well and quick, because the easier that move goes, then the more time I will have prior to February to kind of work ahead and start building up the sort of back half of the show. But that said, we are going into, I cannot believe it's going to be 2025 already, but we are going into a fairly big year for the show because we have been keeping pace to do our 10 seasons of the Hallowoods at a rate of one season per year, more or less. And even though the length of the seasons is a little bit variable in those cases, we are still tracking towards that goal overall, which means that we will by like late summer, early fall next year be halfway through Hello from the Hallowoods, which is a big milestone, and definitely a big kind of moment for the show as well. The halfway point of any story is typically a kind of a big pivot, a moment of truth, a realization. And so I really look forward to what season 5 holds for that. And then in a similar way, not quite in the same halfway mark vein, but we will be moving once we're done with season 5, we will be going into season 6, which will be the kind of the end of the middle 3. This Hallowoods is really conceived as like 3 trilogies and an epilogue. And so the middle beat of this or I guess the sixth season will be kind of the big finale for this middle arc. And in a way, really wrap up a lot of things from our first of those finales back in season three. Because there's a lot of things that haven't been resolved from that fallout yet, or were kind of delayed by what happened in that season. So there's a lot of things that need to come together for season six. And so as we barrel towards that and run through our episodes of season five, there are some fairly explosive places that season five goes, I think, but season six, that will be kind of a big milestone season that we're building up towards. So it will be a fun, as fun as it can be as a Hallowoods listener. I'm not sure if fun is the emotion for listening to this show, but hope a dramatic time, hopefully, I'm sure. So I can't wait to continue crafting this story and hopefully get some novels out as well in the foreseeable future. That said, let's turn to our patrons Ask Box, where we have a couple of questions that good folks have asked. Elizabeth Kilroy in the Q&A box asks, is the Museum of Broken Promises open to the public? Can anyone come in and take a gander at the exhibitions, or is it exclusively for the folks who are featured in said exhibitions? I think I think if you want to be specific, they are kind of in a like sort of a setup phase. You can technically, if you manage to ever just jump on while it's in motion at some point, climb aboard and go see stuff. But such visitors are typically people who have broken promises themselves. So they are, as I think the original descriptor of it goes. So they may not all be there to stay, but they have that in common with the place, anyways. But in general, I think the museum has yet to really open its doors. It is in a process of collecting stuff, but probably by the time the Museum of Broken Promises is actually open for business and properly curated and exhibited and sort of ready to go, probably humanity will be sort of a long dead whisper. And it is Rothagroth, I think, sort of means of preserving a little bit of our history, so that once our world eventually becomes mulch, there will be something left over, some little bit of story left. And so that is, it is not a museum for us. It is a museum about us, for someone who will come long after. Let's go to a question from Yami in the chat, who asks, now that Lady Ethel is back to interrupting Nick's broadcast, was he not... Oh, gosh. Now that Lady Ethel is back to interrupting Nick's broadcast, was he not able to hear Clem last season as he never made a comment on it? I've been wondering this for a while. Apologies. I stumbled right into season 4 spoilers. Secondly, probably more season 4 spoilers to come. I think it's not the only time that this has happened. And I think these are, it's not that he can't hear them, but they are, if Dream is like a radio to some extent in the way that it functions in the show, there's a lot of people broadcasting into it. And although Nick listens to it all, he probably isn't fully cognizant or not necessarily paying attention equally to everything that's going on. And so Nick especially tends to target a very specific collection of listeners, which is us, but is also broadcasting sort of universe wide to everything that sleeps. And so I think he gets particularly annoyed when Ethel interrupts because of her personality. And also the fact that she's using Dream not as like an art form or a form of expression, but she's using Speaking in Dream as a marketing tactic to cannibalize his audience. And so I think that provokes his ire in particular. Whereas for people who have been using this same Dream based tape recorder, which has passed now hands a couple of times from Horace Loveland in The Rider Out of Time to Lawrence Abbott at Downing Hill to Clementine, um, this this device at least has been used a couple of times to add stuff to the Dream program that we listen to. It has not always been met with such hostility. There is also that Nick was not exactly fully in his faculties in the same way during season 4. He was primarily sort of in one place, an unpleasant place for him, and a little bit more passively listening to things from afar. So there is also that aspect that he wasn't really talking directly to us at almost any point during that season, which probably if he had been around, there might have been more interaction there. But that link, that sense of presence to kind of curate the experience for us was much reduced in that season. So that probably lends a little bit to it as well. Um, and then also, I don't think he would have had quite as much spite against poor Clem recording on this thing as he does towards Lady Ethel's transmissions nonstop. But there is, of course, the sort of magnificent coincidence of this show's format that both Nick and Ethel are back at the same time and gone at the same time and back at the same time. Lastly, we go to a question from Hannah in the Ask Box. And for those of you in the chat, feel free to drop any questions. We'll get into there shortly. Hannah in the Ask Box says, "Hello, longtime listener, first time question asker. You've chosen a good week to ask questions. It's our last before the break, but more opportunities will come along come February. And these are both season 3 questions, but I think not really spoiler questions exactly. These are more, if anything, clarifying questions, which might aid your tracking of what happens in season 3. But these are great questions. I'm very happy these were asked. In episode 120, the bear is temporarily destroyed by something that's not bats. Is it the colony? Is it Olivier's ice shards? This is something that, strangely enough, the very first horror story that I wrote when I was just thinking about getting into trying to write horror, and it was one of several short horror stories that I wrote before starting to write Hello from the Hallowoods later that summer. And this was a story called The Murmuration, and it was terribly written. But and I say that lovingly to my past self, but a problem that I had early on when I was getting back into writing was using a metaphor every sentence. Every time something was described, it was with a metaphor. And so this made for some really wordy prose. It lingers in to the first episodes of Hello from the Hallowoods, but believe it or not, that's not the worst that it ever was. But that said, this short story, which I would have to edit heavily in order to let anyone read, was called The Murmuration. And The Murmuration was about a storm of kind of energy. It appeared like sort of fractal, prismatic, triangle reflections passing through the air. And it would absorb people and then sort of keep reflections of them. Their memories, their pasts, their physical selves would be just gone, absorbed into it. And so the murmuration was both kind of a predatory thing that you would see racing down a breezy autumn country swampland road towards you, but it was also something where you would live forever with everyone that the murmuration had ever absorbed. And so the murmuration crops up via cameo a couple of times in the Hallowoods. In the Hallowoods verse, I think it originally shows up unnamed as a thing that was summoned from the crystal dimension in like an early season one or season two like episode prologue. Um, and it has, I think, one or two other appearances in the show. It gets explicitly named, but is kind of a blink and you miss it thing. Sometime in season three, in one of those local events interludes, and then when Riot, Olivier, Beast the Bear, that whole crew stumble into it towards the end of season three, it briefly sort of like flutters out of a pit and temporarily flies right into Beast the Bear, which is not good for Beast the Bear. But that is basically it. It is its own dimensional being. It doesn't want to be here particularly, but since it is unspeakable, it has found sort of a home in the eldritch forest of the Northmost, and it just sort of flies off, and I think that's the last we ever see of it in canon. So it is an easy one to miss. And then the second half of this question is in episode 136, Grug saves Diggory from the Phantom Station. Why did she who lurks beneath send Grug north? What was his mission? This one cracks me up to no end because it was all throughout season three. Grug has received, I think, 3 or 4 bonus stories from the Patreon where he gets his mission, he begins his trek north, he's on his way north, and I think even briefly shows up in the episode Cats, where Nimbus is like taking stock of everything. But as far as the like vast majority of the listeners who are concerned, Grug never shows up in season three until a pivotal moment near the end. And so it is one of those like artifacts of how the bonus stories and the main show like work together. But I also couldn't completely pass up the humor that was there is a reason that this guy has been sort of in the background working his way on the same journey as the main cast the whole time, but it's just been sort of behind the scenes and invisible to most of the audience. But with that said, Grug's mission originally was to head north and I believe protect the heart in the Arctic, with the sort of goal that it would create habitable frogland conditions for Logmalog's sort of frogland cult to keep evolving. But ultimately, after meeting Diggory, love won, and Grug just went home empty-handed, which is probably the happiest thing that came out of season three. We also see Grug after that in the also obscure facets of the show. We also see Grug briefly in the My Love from the Moormeyer Valentine's card collection, which is also there on Patreon. And that checks in on a couple of characters during the break between seasons 3 and seasons 4. But Grug is one of them, and he's got an adventurous life. Grug is definitely supposed to return to the main show at some point. And I would love to check in on how Grug's journey has changed. But unfortunately, Grug's frog life has not been quite pressing enough to make it into these first 8 episodes of season 5, but hopefully, in the back half of season 5, we'll get to check in on our favorite, unassuming, sometimes unemployed frogman. So I believe that will bring us finally to our YouTube chat. So Beanie says, well, if you met any of the characters in real life, which would you be friends with and which would you hate the most? Hmm. Oh man, this is a good question. I think, I mean, if I met any of these characters in real life, probably something has gone horribly wrong in the world. But I think I would get along pretty well with Mix Morel. I think we have similar decorating sensibilities. I think we would, have some lovely tea time conversations, and that would probably be my ideal way to spend the time. I don't think I would thrive in Downing Hill, even if I did have any kind of supernatural power, which I don't. Um, Disclaimer. Um, just on account of the high pressure of academia, and the sort of drive to have to prove yourself is not something that I'm a huge fan of. Obviously, I don't think most of the Botco folks and I would get along very well. It's kind of that awkward thing where someone like at a holiday party is like, "Oh yeah, yeah, nice to meet you, nice to meet you. What do you do? Oh, nice, nice. Yeah, I'm into cryptocurrency." And it's like, "Oh yeah, okay, very nice. Ooh, okay, let me find a different conversation." Um, I think Diggory and I would not. I think the want to be friends there on both sides would be there, but I think being around each other would be awkward. I feel like it would be two people who are too polite trying to interact, and neither of them being able to like decide on a course of action compared to another. But it probably would get into, I could see trying to teach some border card games being the thing that would ease that evening conversation along. um I think there's a couple, cosmic entities that would be fun to talk to. Zizig Ziz or Rotha Groth, but the problem would just be getting them to listen or pay attention in any significant way. Um, I think obviously Mort is easy to be friends with. Mort is friends with everyone. And I think it doesn't take much to amuse Mort. You can kind of just point out things about the surroundings or list off science facts. And I think that would completely satiate Mort's social desires. So Mort is probably the strong always call. Creep would also be fun. Creep and I would go into a conversation. Only Creep would come out, but it's a easy thing. You just kind of shake hands, and then you are the same person, and then your memories are infused, and they live on forever in some way, and that's about the best you can ever ask for, really. It's almost community living. So those are some of my my Hallowoods impressions. But that said, I think that will bring us to the end of our Q&A, everybody. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening to the show. Enjoy your holiday season, and we will be back coming this spring for more Q&As and also more Hallowoods. Until then, take care, everybody. See you on the flip side.